Hello, welcome to today's face reading caricature. Today I'm going to be face reading and caricaturing this guy. This is Brian Rose. He's currently one of the mayoral candidates for London. He's been going around telling people that he's the second favourite to win, despite all opinion polls showing the opposite. He's actually in the bottom 2%. He's an interesting character. He's presented a YouTube channel called London Real. This was where he kind of became notorious, and he recently had the channel shut down after an interview with David Icke. David Icke was unsurprisingly going on about how COVID is a hoax and everything, and the channel was shut down. And this guy, Brian Rose, ended up doing a fundraiser to open up some sort of it was a public free speech platform. It's like he was going to do his own version of YouTube. Anyway, he raised something like $1 million, and he never materialized this new social media platform that he was promising. Instead, it looks like he's used the money to bankroll a mayoral candidacy in London. So by the time this video comes out, he'll already have failed his attempt at becoming London mayor. But I thought he's an interesting character. And I thought there's something about him. Like when I first saw him, I always thought, fair play to him. He's obviously a 62-year-old guy who looks after himself. He's probably well connected. I sensed there was a kind of corporate thing to him, a corporate background. It turns out he's only 49, and he retired when he was 41 after making his money he was a trader or something. Anyway, I want to talk about his face here. So we're going to split the face into two. When we do this, we find his right-hand side, which is here. This is the side we want to be looking at now. His right-hand side is the public face. So that's what we've got here. If we put the two right-hand sides together, this is the face he wants to present to the public. Whereas in face reading, the left-hand side of the face is the face where we kind of repress our emotions. And I want to show one very important thing that I first noticed about this guy is his smile. Can you see his smile? He's kind of got an upturned smile on his left side, and then it kind of turns down. So his face is like zoop, like that. That's his smile. So what does that tell us? Well, the downturn smile is often this kind of downturning. If you have a downturned sort of mouth, that's a sign of someone who has a very pessimistic view of life, possibly someone who's experienced great trauma in their life. You naturally develop these kind of downturned lines, whereas somebody who's kind of more pessimistic will have who's rather more optimistic, and usually optimistic through having a more more open, maybe philosophical view of life, will have these kind of upturned kind of ends to their lips. He has kind of an upturned mouth on his public side and a downturned mouth on his real side. So that's very strange. That was the first thing I noticed about him, face. And I did his face twice just to make sure. It's the same thing. There's this kind of happy kind of mouth here, but we know naturally his mouth kind of goes down. You can see that. Another interesting thing is here, his chin is quite square on his public face. This is a sign that someone is very stubborn, or they can be very strong-willed. Here, he's got a really narrow chin. And normally when someone's got a narrow chin, it shows that they're weak-willed, or they're lacking in will, they're lacking in strength. And it was often believed that they were the sort of people who should retire early because of their lack of strength. And it's interesting that this guy did actually retire at 41. So there's another interesting kind of coincidence. We've also got the eyes. That's the other thing to notice. On his public face, the eyes are quite big and they're quite broad. This implies someone who's very friendly, open, gregarious. It implies that he's more of a people person, whereas on the real side, he's kind of got these much smaller eyes. He's got this sort of heavier outer eyelid hangs down. His eyes are much more closer together. So he's less trustworthy and he's much less open and honest than he presents himself. So those are the two sides of his face. Interestingly, a kind of triangular shaped face, which is what I would say he has, is associated with people who are, they're often people that get behind radical causes, apparently. And it seems interesting that he, as a mayoral candidate, it seems a kind of radical diversion for him from being a city trader to this YouTube motivational guy, and now he's a mayor. It seems like he's almost, it does feel almost cult-like. If anyone's seen his YouTube videos, or he's hired some buses with his face on it, he's hired billboards with his face on it all over London. So these are going to be my two main reference pictures. I'm probably going to go with this one, just because it's a little bit more detailed. So let's not move it. Let's just move it to the side. So there we have him. So like I said, I'm going to start off with a kind of, just get some basic shapes. So he's got this wide forehead and this quite a narrow sort of chin. So let's get this in. So there's another thing I wanted to talk about, another bit of asymmetry, which is to do with where his ear is. Let me just get a better colour in this. Now generally, when you're doing caricatures, the top of the ear kind of crosses past into the eyebrow, and the bottom of the ear kind of touches the bottom of the nose. His ears are actually very, very low set, which is kind of unusual. And generally speaking, the higher the ears, the sooner someone is believed to have come into their own or found their kind of path in life. Often the lower the ears, the opposite is true. They haven't sort of found their path until much later in life. And maybe that's the case with this guy. Maybe he's in his 50s and he's just kind of finding his path. It's also sometimes believed to have been a sign of a mental deficiency or the onset of Alzheimer's. So that's an interesting thing here. And the fact that this is on the public side of his face is a bit concerning as well. He's got a very prominent nose, which is usually a sign of someone who's very individual, very individualistic, very self-motivated. This is always a good sign. Generally, the bigger the nose, the better. We can see the chin here. It is a kind of slightly pointy sort of chin. Some interesting shapes on his face. His brow bone here, strangely for the sort of person you'd expect him to be, he doesn't have much of a brow bone. If men don't have much of a brow bone, it's a sign of a lack of testosterone. So he's not as alpha male as perhaps he wants to make out. But a rounded forehead is a sign of good imagination and someone who's quite creative. So he's got quite a large, quite dominant nose. This is often seen as a very positive thing. Large noses are a sign of ambition. This comes back to our evolution, where Neanderthals who moved into the colder plains would develop larger noses because they had to, the air needed to be warmed up before it went into their lungs. So our noses became larger. So people with larger noses are seen as having better lung capacity. The Chinese believed quite literally that if someone could breathe bigger, if their noses were bigger, their lungs were bigger. And this was connected to the ego, because when you breathe in, your lungs expand. And this is where we get the idea that someone's full of themselves come from. If you're full of yourself, as we see with someone like Brian Rose, ego can get a little bit untamed, perhaps. There was an interesting interview, actually, with a guy that he started his London Real channel with. And it's on a YouTube channel called Rebel Wisdom. And the guy who was being interviewed was called Nick Gabriel, I believe. And he was talking about how he worked with Brian for all these years and found him to be quite this is his own words, a very shallow, kind of narcissistic kind of character. Just try and get these. It is unusual to have such a disparity in the eyes. Two eyes that tell us two different stories. Let's just kind of get these ideas in. It's very difficult now because it's so. I believe that this is a sincere smile of his, but to draw it, it doesn't look sincere at all. And he's got the thinnest lips. I mean, he's barely got lips. Flat ears on the side of the head are actually a sign of someone who's a good listener. Someone who takes on board other people's ideas. But it could also be a sign of someone who plagiarizes and steals on people's ideas. So. These lines around his mouth, these are called purpose lines. And there's belief that you should have these purpose lines marked on your face by the time you were 50. Because if you had them, not only did your life have purpose, but it meant that when you retired, you'd have something still to live for. So as we can see, he's got very deep purpose lines. I guess maybe they're emphasised by the fact his face is so kind of tight looking. It's a very doesn't have much flesh on the face. Right, so this is kind of it, really. So that's my little Brian Rose caricature. I've kind of made him a little bit less grey. It is interesting to try and draw someone who has such an asymmetrical face. You know, when you've got two different size eyes, a kind of a mouth that goes up on one side, comes down the other. The ears are unbalanced, but I didn't really pay too much attention to that. If you want to find out more about Brian Rose, it's a fascinating interview on a YouTube channel called Rebel Wisdom. And it's an interview with a guy called Nick Gabriel, I believe, who used to be a business partner with this guy, Brian Rose. And they started London Real, the YouTube channel. I think it's got like 3 million subscribers. And Brian Rose, kind of got rid of this guy and took it over and sort of made it his own thing. And so there we have it. Bizarre kind of guy. He's interesting to watch. He's kind of like a Bond villain or something like that. Like I said, I thought he was kind of, a sort of youngish looking 60-year-old, but he's actually kind of an old looking 40-year-old. I think he's 49. So there we have it. Brian Rose. Still, at the time of recording, he's one of the mayoral candidates. Apparently there's a rumor that he put so much money betting on himself to make the odds look more in his favour. So there you have it, Brian Rose. Like I was saying, kind of challenging to draw someone who's got an asymmetrical face and to sort of capture a likeness of them, but hopefully that's okay. What if I brought that in slightly? I don't know. Maybe I should have brought that in. It's about there. Something like that anyway. So that'll do. That's Brian Rose, a mayoral candidate. He describes himself as being the second favourite to win. There's some kind of controversy around that. It seems that he's been putting bets on himself, or he's been encouraging other people, his fans, to sort of put bets on him winning, to make it look as though there's more people in support of him than there actually really is. But that's just a rumour that has been going around the message boards. So there we have it. Brian Rose, strange character. We've done his face reading. We know he's someone that likes to present himself in a open, strong kind of way, but in real life he's kind of quite shady and is a bit much more reserved and much more weaker-willed than he wants to present himself. He likes to parade around wearing these silly pinstripe suits like he's a villain in a Dick Tracy cartoon or something. But really, there's something much more reserved, and he's holding something in. There's something he's holding within, I would say. So that's my little analysis of him. There's my little caricature. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you want more of these things. I'll try and put one out every week, I guess. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.